Tonight's Second Hampton Roads Black Caucus meetup guest is a staple of Norfolk. He's a community activist, a role model, a policy creator, a father. He's Norfolk's Ward 7 City Council candidate, Michael Muhammad, a voice for the powerless towards the powerful. Mr. Muhammad is intrigued at improving the city. We'll mix in some of our meetup questions on business, education, and community, but we'll also bring up specific issues relevant to Ward 7 that are of interest to Norfolk's Black community. Also bring up Vice President of the HRBC Community Action Team, Andrea Dixon, Norfolk resident and Ward 7 voter, helped create some of the most important questions too. Shout out to Andrea. Mr. Muhammad, how are you, sir?
I'm well. Thank you for your invitation and thank you for your spirit, the program that you all provide. I enjoyed your last guest, our next governor, Mr. Lynn Youngkin, and I've been very interested in watching this program and seeing its maturation. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us again, Mr. Muhammad. So, what do you believe the role of a Ward 7 council member is, and what would you believe your responsibility would be?
Very good. Thank you, sir. I believe that the responsibility of a councilman is first commitment to community and to the people of the precinct, ward, or area in which you're elected. I believe that my role is to be an advocate, first and foremost, the chief advocate of the people. Because the people's concerns are so numerous, and the city being the representative or the represented government, the people look to government for direction and answer because that's the way government has set it up. The unfortunate reality is when people look to government, they don't find service. They find people who drive by or stop by during political season, ask for their help, and then they disappear. I believe my role is to be present, to be available, to be a service-oriented individual, to be accessible, to be honest, and to be committed to the people, not the developers and the business interests that are outside of the sphere of the government.
All right. Now, without completely going away from the concept of business, when you were a guest on the Beach Brothers show, you did speak on business. So tell us about Black-owned business and your vision about how to improve that in Norfolk.
Very good. Thank you, sir. That question, that's why I'm tired as such. In this stormy day, we were out visiting some of the businesses here in Ward 7, some of the storefronts. But we've spent a great deal of time over the last month or two at Military Circle, because unfortunately, as you know, the development plans that we're not opposed to development, but we are opposed to development that excludes the present businesses. We believe that Military Circle is the greatest example of a combined group of businesses, particularly Black-owned businesses. They dubbed it Black Wall Street because from sector to sector, corner to corner, section to section, where the businesses used to be white and then they transitioned into the foreign community, you now find finally it's in the hands of Black. The unfortunate reality is, while it is in the hands of Black people and it is turning a good profit for the city of Norfolk, taxes, and those families, they face uncertainty because the city fails to communicate. Just the other day, there was a ribbon cutting for a phenomenal business, the Homage photo gallery, and all should go by and visit it. And the mayor of Norfolk, Mr. Kenneth Alexander, was there to cut a ribbon, but he would take no questions from the businesses about their future. We're tired of the game playing with the business community that the big conglomerates, such as developers, are writing checks and controlling the day. And the small businesses, such as we find there at Military Circle Mall, are being disregarded and discounted as being a part of the landscape. So we're in favor of having a face-to-face meeting first and foremost with the people at Military Circle to discuss their future and not an online discussion. And then moving into the broader community to show forth the inequities. I close on that point with this. The other night I was invited to a business roundtable in Virginia Beach. And I have to say, I'm embarrassed as a citizen of this great city of Norfolk that you all have led such an awesome trail in Black business gathering, meeting, and organizing. And we have yet to have a structured entity like that in Norfolk. So I'm committed to forwarding an example followed by Virginia Beach, our brothers and sisters, our neighbors just across the border.
So, Mr. Muhammad, on a little over a week ago, right, on September 14th, the city council meeting, that meeting talked about the Tidewater Gardens redevelopment. It was touched on, right?
Yeah.
Residents have been given a couple 2-week notices to leave, maintaining the October timeline pause on development. However, due to issues with residents and the city council liaison, people are returning to Tidewater Gardens due to a lack of affordable housing. How do you want to address issues like this?
Well, I first want to address the inhumane aspect of this current council. Not just dealing with the residents of Tidewater Gardens and the St. Paul's quadrant of Diggstown and other sections of the city, but also our homeless population. Because ultimately what's taking place in Tidewater Gardens is not only adding to our homelessness population, but to mental anguish and mental illness. When you go into a community that you've known and it's been devastated and it's now been all but torn down, and you're forced back into those environments that were being prepared for demolition, you are being treated in a substandard manner. But at the same time, we have a council, a mayor, an appointed Ward 7 seat holder, and others who are meeting with developers of multiple family dwellings, these large apartment complexes, such as Breeden Development and others, but yet they have no interest in making those places affordable or accessible to the people from those communities. They have a different community plan for Norfolk than the one that is currently here. I want to conclude that point as we talk about Tidewater Gardens and the vision that I had by pointing to two things. Several months ago, Ms. Soledad O'Brien did an awesome expose for BET News on the conditions of Norfolk, the mistreatment of the poor, and the mistreatment of those in the St. Paul's quadrant. It's unfortunate and sad that we have a mayor that has a national profile in the Democratic Party, a national profile as the chancellor of Schesventer College and the Aviation Institute, and yet he's not embarrassed by such a national slap in the face. And then we have Forbes magazine do a similar conversation about the way the poor are treated. We have a council that is tone deaf in a city that is in crisis. And so the people of Tidewater Gardens, of Young's Terrace, and Calvert Square are in tremendous, tremendous despair. And as a result, we're increasing the crime and the violence problem. And we can't ignore the fact that there are more burials than businesses open. So when you see this problem and its exacerbation, that will continue. And we have to ask, who are the benefactors?
So you bring up good points, right? The city council continue to make strides on equity and inclusive incentives, but there has been inaction on the mayor's commission on social equity and economic opportunities. He mentioned he chaired a group that will include broadly represented people from Norfolk, focusing on the inequality in educational and economic barriers. What would you do to make sure a commission like this is no longer inactive?
I would literally assume the responsibility as the Ward 7 representative to chair those committees. because ultimately, as we know, the various mayor commissions are not chaired by the mayor. They're chaired by various members of the council and community, and then reports are forwarded back. So I would take leadership of that. And as such, I would then identify in the communities that you have identified representatives who are not a part of the establishment, who are not looking for favor, but simply want justice and equity. And I would appoint them to spearhead the conversation. Unfortunately, too often in Norfolk, as our current treasurer once said about a former council member, if you don't talk right or dress right in Norfolk, she said about, Don Hester once said about Herbert Collins, we need someone who talks better and dresses better to represent Norfolk. Well, the unfortunate reality is everyone doesn't talk better or dress better, but their ideas, their mindset, and what they bring to the table can be very transformative. We need to stop the classism, sexism, racism, and xenophobia that has existed in Norfolk and carries such favor. Do you understand that Mr. Ramin Fatihi, who ran for our Commonwealth attorney, was opposed by the establishment of Norfolk, even though he had been in that office for no more than the reason that he's a Muslim? So when you see the name Muhammad, and you see those in this city gathering in a xenophobic way to oppose my work, even though they have accepted my work, go and look at the words of the mayor of Norfolk related to me in the media in the past, and now look at his forwarding of a Chesapeake native as our Ward 7 representative. And then we have to ask the question, why? Is this a rubber stamp insurance vote so that we can carry favor with developers and allow the people of Tidewater, Young's, Calvert, and other impoverished areas to be pushed out of Norfolk into neighboring cities? That's why you see an influx of crime in Virginia Beach, in Portsmouth, in Newport News, and Hampton. Not saying that Norfolk is problematic in such that we carry trouble, but what happens is when you dump people in new environments without resolving previous conflicts, you exist now only as a problem. So we're growing the problem instead of addressing the problem.
You touched on a few questions back on Military Circle, if only briefly, but now we can go a little bit more in depth. Military Circle businesses have found out they're not going to have a home for their businesses much longer. So touch on the vanishing Military Circle Mall and touch on its plans for redevelopment.
Thank you, Conrad, for that question. You know, the good thing, one of the good things about our candidacy and our campaign is people ask all the time, Michael, if you oppose the council, how then can you make change and work with the council? Well, the reality is not only have we been policymakers from the top down, having worked with federal, state, and local officials to create legislation such as the Ashanti Alert, the missing adult system that is more pertinent now than ever as we see the increase in missing persons. But when we talk about those businesses, to bring it back to that question, we have policy creation mentality, and we would work engagement with those businesses and with the community to ensure that they would have first right of refusal in any forthcoming projects or development, or that they would be relocated within the sphere of the businesses that they've already built. Because you have to look at the fact that these people have expended a lot of money in marketing and advertisement to draw people's attention to their product, and then their product will be vanquished and given away to wealthy developers. All of those three developers who've been proposed having connections to our mayor and council. I'll say this about Military Circle. Not only do we want to see those businesses thrive, but I think about the trophies goods that is located in Military Circle Mall. A Black-owned furniture store owned by a young man from the Roberts Park and Bowling Park area of our city, who started out selling mattresses one by one from the back of his truck. And now he owns two locations. One, he owns the building that he brought a former 7-Eleven. And the other, he's leasing in Military Circle, one of the largest furniture stores in our city. And now he faces uncertainty. that man should have the first right of refusal in anything forthcoming. I'm talking about Mr. Steve Johnson. And then we're looking at the gallery that we spoke of, an unprecedented, beautiful art expose that is given by the people from Norfolk's Park Place. Mr. Stefan, who is the lead artist, that artist. And then you have other businesses who are all, if you look, Ward 7 persons. And so therefore they're being displaced, potential to go out of business, to go to other cities, and we have no plan to keep them here. I would rectify.
Wow.
Part of that I had heard that you touched on the Ashanti alert in that answer. I want you to just go a little bit more into that and the process of it. It's sort of nationally known now, so tell us a little bit more about the background of that particular issue and how it's important to Ward 7.
Yes, sir. Very interesting that you asked it's important to Ward 7. We sit here on Granby Street, and once you cross Granby Street from the west side and go to East Granby Street, you'll find that everything on the east side of Norfolk and the south side, outside of downtown Norfolk, is in Ward 7. Within that context, you'll find that the amphibious space of Norfolk at Gate 3 is in Ward 7. That is the last place that Miss Billy was seen alive. That's where she was kidnapped from. Her car was found on Tallyho in the Azalea community. Cell phone was found on Tallyho. And then her car was later found in Ocean View. The context of the crime was all Norfolk and the majority Ward 7. Unfortunately, for 6 days, the city of Norfolk abdicated its responsibility to the city of Virginia Beach to lead that investigation. We had a poor investigation that led to a young lady being away from her family for 11 days and found in the most horrific conditions. In that process, I was called to the front by 4 years ago yesterday, I was called by Mr. Gene Mobley, formerly of Wavy or WBC News, now Wavy 10. And she said she was in distress. She said, I don't know who called, so I called you. She asked me to help the family. I went and met with the family, and the mother, Miss Brandy Billy, was just here this weekend to receive a proclamation from your city on behalf of its resident, Ashanti. We worked diligently to find her daughter, and then we traveled to the halls of the Virginia State General Assembly, and then to the halls of the United States Congress, and then to the desk of the President of the United States with legislation that says that you have to go and look for people 18 to 64 years old who go missing under critically enhanced circumstances. So what Virginia has termed the critical missing adult alert, we have championed under former Congressman Scott Taylor and current U.S. Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat and a Republican, legislation that covers the entirety of the United States of America and its Native American reservations for persons 18 to 64. Now, 4 years later, while the legislation is in place, unfortunately, a new administration has failed to fully fund it. So Senator Mark Warner and others are working diligently in the Senate amongst the Appropriations Committee as they adjourn next month to fully fund the Ashanti alert so that the young lady that was just found after having gone on a camping trip, and the young man just found in Illinois, and many Black men and women around America who've gone missing for a long time under the age of 18 and 64 could be sought after. The last thing I'll say on that, we have the Amber Alert, Amber from 0 to 17. And then we have the Silver Alert from 65 on up. But there was a gap in coverage for people 18 to 64, which interestingly enough is the largest number of missing persons. So I'm happy to have been the vessel for the exposure of that legislation that now has the potential to save so many lives. And so from that perspective, not only do we have the ability to work across the aisle, Democrat and Republican, but we can also engage community activists, and others in the process to bring about legislation. The last thing I'll say on that, this was all done on December 31st, 2018, during a government shutdown where no legislation was being passed. We were able to get this done by the president's hand and put into law. And we're very happy about that. And we look forward in Ward 7 to forwarding more legislation locally, statewide, and federally.
Now, I had read in the news today something regarding Poplar Hall. I think residents have petitioned against new development at Old Poplar Halls Elementary. So could you touch on what's going on down there and what you wish to do about it?
I wish to serve the residents, not my own self-interest, not that of my colleagues or those who put me in place. The people of Poplar Hall it's a majority senior community or aging community. Many of them bought their homes early in their careers, many school teachers, many bankers, lawyers, we have a judge. You have many, many different people to include the mayor, state delegate, Angela Williams-Graves, and others live there in that community. It's a beautiful residential community. But the short-sighted money grubbers who represent our current council, unfortunately, have decided to put 300 apartments on top of this already struggling community, struggling because of its aging population and because of the lack of concern and consideration from the city. And so when this developer came to the city with the desire to build, instead of meeting with the community, instead of the mayor and the Ward 7 appointed seat holder meeting with the community, they accepted a $2,500 contribution on behalf of the Ward 7 appointed seat holder, still not having met with the community. It was not until my team, led by our communications director, Ms. Lauren Hope, was able to get this story out in the press that now the reading group and the councilwoman have agreed to meet with the Ward 7 community.
Wow. Speaking of schools, educational improvement is a pillar for the Hampton Roads Black Caucus. How strong of a bedrock piece is education to you and your view of the community? How does it mesh with the council seats?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question, please?
Sure, no problem. Speaking of schools, educational improvement is a pillar of the Hampton Roads Black Caucus.
Right.
How strong of a bedrock piece is education to you and your view of the community? How does it mesh with the council seats?
Oh, listen. The word education is comprised of two words in etymological terms. Edu and kare, meaning to bring out or to draw out that which is within. It is most important to bring out or to draw out that which is within our youth and to give them an opportunity to grow in a safe environment. When you find out that education is first hampered with metal detectors, with police officers, and all of those with bad food, how then can we expect the growing minds to progress? Then when you look at, in Norfolk's Ward 7 particularly, the dilapidated buildings, bricks falling, mold. You talk about SARS and this COVID-19 disease, but what about our children's breathing in these buildings that OSHA have even found to be improperly inhabited? These buildings have mold and mildew that have built up for many years because of leaking roofs and other things. And so now you expect children to go in and learn in a city in crisis, an educational system in crisis. Education is paramount to me. I am a victim of the failed Norfolk public school. I say that. I don't speak glowingly of our school system because it is in fact in crisis. We are led by a school board superintendent who lives in Chesapeake, a city that has a growing and glowing school system. We need that mentality here in Norfolk. So I'm 100% in support of better schools and better education, but we have to start. We have to start with safe schools, safe environments, and then make sure that the buildings are safe. Norfolk spends $74 million a year for the last 5 years on debt service on $1.2 billion that was given away to wealthy white developers. And now that debt service on an interest-only loan serves to keep us in a triple credit A rating. Well, guess what? We spent $120 million out of that $1.2 billion to build 5 schools. But in 5 years, we've paid 3 times that amount in debt service. This is bad leadership. This is not looking out for our children and our future generations. This is holding us hostage. So my position on education is clear. I'll say this also. We have a candidate in the Ward 7 race, one of 6, Mr. Hawkins, who I'm told was to be here tonight and then canceled. He's an educator in the Norfolk system. And we track his educational direction to 3 of the most failed schools on the South Side. ECC, St. Helena, and then we come over to where he is now and then promoted to assistant principal, PB Young. How do you get promoted to assistant principal when school after school that you've been to has been a failure? This is that inside promotion that we saw with Mr. Smeagol, and I remember Mr. Hawkins decrying as insider playing, double dipping, and corrupt. Why would you want to be a school board? Why would you want to be a principal and a councilman knowing you vote on the budget of your boss? That's no different than the current appointed seat holder taking run after being appointed. Norfolk is just corrupt. From our treasurer to our sheriff, now to this nefarious behavior. We need someone who's willing to call a spade, and whether you have agreed with my positions, my diction, my delivery, the one thing you have to say, I've been consistent. And as a consistent man calling out the crisis that is Norfolk, Virginia, I just want to see this awesome city live. Virginia Beach is growing leaps and bounds, and we should grow with it.
Well, again, you bring up some very interesting points. So, Mayor Kenny Alexander endorsed the status quo for the seat. What do you think about this?
Not only did he endorse it, but he's her #1 contributor. That's interesting. The mayor, who would have to work with any of the 6 candidates. I've had people say, Michael, how can you expect to be elected if you can't work with the council? Well, how can the mayor expect to have a cohesive working relationship with any of those incoming councilwomen or councilmen when he has hand-selected, anointed, appointed, and then financed a candidate? When you look at her finance report and his, it's like twin cousins. Twin cousins, because his has more, hers less, but they're the same shadow government interests. Mr. Vince Mistraka. Oh, Kaufman and Knowles. Are we still playing that game all these years later? Isn't that why we got rid of Mr. Frank? Wilcox and Savage, who are the attorneys for 3, 10, 13, and formerly the pilot, now having representative interests, not only of these media entities, but also giving handedly to a candidate. And now you wonder why the pilot 3, 10, or 13 won't cover the Ward 7 race. Corruption. City in crisis. We need a crisis leader. I am that one. I've been that one for over 20 years, and I deserve an opportunity to take my community service into public service. It's enough of the game plan. It's enough of the short-term question answering. Mr. Alexander has given himself over to being a hand puppeted individual for the West Side. It was black people who elected him, white people who financed him, and white people who control him. White people control his business, white people control his career, white people appointed him as the chancellor of Centura College and the Aviation Institute. It's no coincidence that the people who sold Centura College, or the Aviation Institute, I should say, on Little Creek Road, to the people who now hire the mayor are also contributors to Ms. Royster. It is a sepulcher of corruption that just runs rampant and unchecked. I told you earlier, they don't even fear the media. They don't fear the police. They don't fear the law because they feel they are above the law. And they mandate and control that council and the votes that come in. And it's unfair. You all in Virginia Beach have not found a way to block the system of corruption that has permeated for years. But Norfolk has found an answer. His name is Michael J. Muhammed. And second, if you vote me in, you'll see a change that will make America great again.
Now, you had touched on leadership, if only briefly, in that last one. And the last scheduled question I had before we sort of dabble with viewer questions is actually about leadership. And leaders are important to the HRBC as there is a need for a growing community of leaders. So touch on your leadership experience in that arena and what you do to stoke that in Norfolk as a Ward 7 rep.
Very good. We mentioned Mayor Alexander. He started in the House of Delegates, and as a delegate, with a very strong personality in the Democratic Party, who's passed on Mr. William Wesley Jacobs and I. We co-wrote the halal portion of the kosher halal bill that was introduced by now Mayor Alexander, then delegate in 2007. I have helped to forward the legislation here locally that led to the state legalization of marijuana. Remember, and Mr. Patrick Wilson of the Richmond Times-Dispatch also recorded that it was I who led the city of Norfolk in the decriminalization effort. But then we bring it back to my most joyous piece of legislation because of how it has and will continue to save lives, and that is the Ashanti Amendment. And we're working on other legislation with federal legislators to address the child abuse disparity. What we've found is that you have abusers who are on record in Georgia, and then they move to Virginia and still abuse children because there's no national registry for child abuse. So we're working with several federal legislators to craft, and their staffs to craft legislation in that genre as well. But when you talk about Norfolk, in 2016, I led the Virginian pilot in writing an article about the over 100 police-involved shootings in the state of Virginia that resulted in death from 2008 to 2016. And Norfolk was the only city in the state that had double-digit numbers. I worked with the now mayor as we worked his campaign for election to show that because of the Frank James, Jesse James syndrome, I call it, the investigation of the Norfolk police after an involved shooting, we constantly had all of these justified shootings. It was not until we either put a case before a grand jury that we got an indictment, or it wasn't until we were able to change the policy here in Norfolk, whereas now the state police investigate our police-involved shootings. Do you understand that we went from double digits in that 8-year span to now having nearly none? And this is all legislative work that I've been blessed and happy to help create. I've also cost the city of Norfolk a tremendous amount of money in that I have led more families in the way of justice after the death of their children at the hands of police. And we put a price to the city of Norfolk, and we've made them drive that price up incrementally now, even in the 7-figure sum, because we believe that when you have to pay, you will pay attention. And once the citizens realize that their budget is being shortfall because of the actions of inept police and inept community, public safety directives, then we'll move. So legislatively, I'll tell you one of the pieces of legislation I look forward for the council to make: the separation between city manager and public safety director. We need a public safety director that is not tied to the council in that direct manner, because it disallows them to be adequate in their carrying of justice. It disallows them to be fair in their posture, and it causes corruption in the public for the families of those in positions of power.
Excellent. Now that is the end of the prepared questions we had in advance, but I do want to touch on some viewer comments and questions if you have a minute. How do you feel about that, Mr. Muhammad?
I don't mind.
All right. I do want to throw up the first comment that these are some great questions from Miss Andrea Dixon, who helped create them, by the way. Let's start off with this.
So how do you plan to implement changes in Ward 7 schools to address the lack of interest in STEAM economics? Economics. And the reason why this is a great question, I'm an engineer as a Black woman, so I am curious to know how you feel about this.
You're the second Black female engineer that I have engaged in the last few days. We were on a tour of the wind turbine just a few days ago, and as we were touring that, the woman leading the tour on behalf of Dominion Energy was a young Black female engineer. And I was so blown away at her intelligence, and I'm so blown away at your intelligence. And so thank you for sharing that. STEM education is very important because the centralized and focused aspect of STEM education gives our children in Ward 7 an opportunity to compete. I think that we miss the opportunity often when we talk about Super Ward 7 to talk about the gem, the educational gem of Ward 7, and that is Norfolk State University. We fail to have a pipeline that runs between Norfolk State University and our public school system. We fail to have a proper mentorship program, an engagement program that interests the children as early as elementary school in what college living is. The last time that most of us as young Black people had experience with college without actually going to college is when they had Hillman on television on A Different World. We don't have those shows. College Life Now on television is Tariq Sinclair on Power Book 2, drug dealing and all of the nefariousness. But we don't have the Nick Cannon style drumline encouragement and engagement. College doesn't seem as cool anymore. Just today, I saw a piece about 6 judges in Philadelphia, all graduates of Hampton University. We have so many educational gems right here, but we're not pipelining our children in. We have Booker T. Washington High School, Booker Talaferro Washington High School, and it has no technology or agriculture program. So Ward 7, for me, and its educational components are very serious and very important to tie in and make real education so that our children are more interested in the picture of education that includes them and not the picture of education that tells us that George Washington could not tell a lie. See, I want to say this. Norfolk's Ward 7 as an educational opportunity got rid of one of our schools named for one of the most luminary Black men in American history. And that Black man was Mr. J.J. Roberts, for whom Roberts Park Elementary was named, where Liberia Drive is, where Monrovia Drive is. Why Liberia Drive? Why Monrovia Drive? Because that Black man, Mr. J.J. Roberts, a student of Marcus Garvey from right here in Norfolk, Virginia, inspired. Marcus Garvey came to America looking for Booker T. Farrell Washington. He was gone 2 years. He set down educational roots in Virginia, Hampton University, Norfolk, Virginia, leaving behind for Marcus Garvey to find Mr. J.J. Roberts. And upon finding J.J. Roberts became a general in the UNIA movement, the United Negro Empowerment Association movement. Why do you bring this up, Muhammad? Because it was J.J. Roberts, a native Norfolkian, who left America and went back to Africa and established the first repatriated nation of former Africans or diaspora Africans back to the continent. The nation of Liberia, established by a Norfolkian, but we took his name down off the schools. But we leave up William Heron Taylor, we leave up Matthew Fontaine Maury, we leave up these names of racial degradation, but we take down and we don't have up the names of Evelyn Butts. We don't have up the names of James Gay. We don't have up the names of William P. Robinson Jr. See, we have to stop that. So educational excellence in Ward 7 for me means putting Black children who are the populace of Ward 7 in the picture of education. So when they look at the picture, they're interested because they see themselves.
Now, I noticed that we also have easily above 6 questions or comments from Sean and John. So if you could, as a favor for me, viewer, condense it all into one question. We'll try to pop that in right before we close out tonight. But we do have 2 questions, one from Mr. Seiko Varner, one from Miss Andrea, again, that are touching on the same topic. So I'm going to bring it up under Seiko's. What are Mr. Michael J. Muhammad's positions or thoughts on the City Council's approach to a citizen review panel?
That's a good question.
I'm so disappointed in the city of Norfolk. You know, we've had since the 1990 decision of the Court of Appeals and the United States Supreme Court, we've had a ward system and 3 Black elected officials. First of a 7-member body, now of an 8-member body. We've achieved a 4-and-4 balance. Well, guess what? Even with that, they're scared to say Black. I remember when I was running the African American outreach operation for Mayor Kennedy Cooper Alexander's campaign, as I was his African American outreach coordinator. I remember he telling us not to mention first Black mayor. He was very timid about that language because he was winning white support. I say that to say, now that he's there on council, and we have 3 others that are there on council, unfortunately, they're so intimidated to say Black, similar to how Mr. Barack Obama was, that they're forgetting to serve Black. And that is the majority population of their wards. So everyone in the city of Norfolk receives services except the poor white and the Black population. I want to speak to that representation. So a citizens review panel is paramount, because if you don't have introspection and review from the citizens, you're hiding something. You're hiding something. Why keep the citizens out? A better informed citizenry is a more responsible citizenry, is a more engaged citizenry. And we have a better population growth and a better engagement when we have introspection and opportunity for citizens to see these videos, to hear these calls and recordings prior to the press and the public.
Go ahead.
I'm fully committed to making sure, even if we don't have what they call a citizens review panel, we'll have one in Ward 7. And whatever I get, I'll bring and I'll share within the context of rules and responsibility, of course. I'll share it and I'll make the citizens aware. I'm not running to be friends with the downtown. This isn't 2 years in and then I'm looking for support from downtown. I'd love to be able to work with my council colleagues in a very refined manner. But unfortunately, we have to smooth the road. You know, Norfolk receives $25.6 million annually per curve for the per curvature repair. But we take out 11.16 million of that and send it to other areas of the budget to cover shortfall. So we have rough and ragged roads. That's the same way our council is. Just like we have to smooth out our roads, we have to smooth out our council. Because unfortunately, right now we're a city in crisis of corruption. I have to say this. You talk about a citizens review panel. Here's why we need a citizens review panel. Up until 2017, the Norfolk sheriff was Bob McCabe. As Norfolk sheriff and former police officer, Bob McCabe engineered a takeover of Norfolk's Fraternal Order of Police by having his sheriff's deputies join, giving him a populist number, therefore carrying the vote and controlling the organization. I say that to say, those police officers who operated in context under that sheriff are now really called into question. Because how was all of this nefariousness, all of this criminality, all of this illegality that he has now been convicted of 11 counts and no one knew? How do we have a police chief in Larry Boone who's being given accommodation and climbing the ladder as he searches for jobs in other cities? How does he get to escape the fact that for 15 years, his predecessor, Michael Goldsmith, and he sat in charge of Norfolk's review department called, what is it called when you, internal affairs. They sat over the internal affairs for 15 years. During that 15-year period, we had R.G. Ford, who went to federal prison for 12 years for some of the most corrupt crimes you could know. And then you also had Officer Victor Decker, who nearly 10 years ago, a little less than 10 years ago, was shot and killed in Virginia Beach. And he's the only police-involved shooting in Southampton Roads that's unsolved. Do you know that Norfolk has on its book one of its police officers killed in a neighboring city unsolved, and that department saying that they don't work with Norfolk's police department because they're corrupt and they don't trust them? Virginia Beach's department said that. I didn't say it. So a citizens review panel is absolutely necessary. Absolutely. How does Officer Victor Decker get accommodations and awards? And then 6 months later, he's dead, and it's found out that he was selling drugs and guns in nightclubs up and down Virginia, Granby Street. These types of things went on in Norfolk's police department. They're in full view. The Virginian pilot did a 7-part expose called The Shot that details exactly what I'm saying word for word. And within context of that, a citizens review panel is not only necessary, but it is absolutely necessary in the face of the continued corruption that is Norfolk, Virginia. And when Mr. Greg Underwood leaves office, if we have an honest man coming in, you'll see what I'm talking about.
So in regards to the citizen review, right? Who would you think would be qualified to be on that citizen review board?
Very good. I think that the families who have experienced this horrific trauma and tragedy at the hands of the police, we should have representatives from those families there. We should have representatives from the police union or members of their families there. We should have attorneys, and we should also have community activists. Groups like various groups throughout America that organize in the context of activism to push back against oppression should not be treated the way that I and others are treated. If you go back to Ferguson, Missouri, and you look at the findings of the Justice Department after they reviewed Ferguson, after they reviewed Cincinnati, they determined, the U.S. Justice Department determined that these cities acted in a way that was illegal towards, in a retribution towards activists who decried injustices. Well, guess what? If they were to ever do a review of Norfolk, Lord have mercy. I have a councilman in Tommy Spiegel who, as the principal of my child's school, called the police on me for simply inquiring about where my child was who did not get off the school bus. I have a mayor who put police on me for simply asking him, in the face of all the violence in Norfolk, would he only give money to groups that he liked? I have several other, the city manager who is called out, and others, the deputy clerk, chief deputy clerk running the campaign of the Ward 7 appointed seat holder. So you have a system of government that is working against me as an activist with a voice and visibility. So I can only imagine what they're doing to the people and to others. I've seen Mr. Jafari Jones of Black Lives Matter incarcerated in Norfolk for activism. I've seen others incarcerated for activism. And so therefore, we have to address these issues from the power position. I don't have to be an outside player anymore. The people can vote me inside to be their voice, to set up these citizen review panels. And when the citizens can't come in and review, they can't stop me from reviewing. And therefore, we will always have an inside track because I determined myself to be fair, just, and honest.
And I would like to put up Son John's comment. What? The people need to know that, Mr. Muhammad. So thank you. I think that's a good closing out version of a comment from Son John today. And definitely like to thank all the viewers for providing their comments and questions tonight. We are about to close it on out. So, Erica, your final thoughts.
Thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Hampton Roads Black Caucus Meetup Series with special guest Michael Muhammad. Community, business, and education are prominent pieces of our group identity, and we are fortunate to have him on to discuss them. We've been having many more of these meetups, and also stay tuned for other upcoming Sparta series programs where we will have on candidates from within special Hampton Roads races to discuss important issues to those communities. To stay up to date with those events, like the Hampton Roads Black Caucus, like, share on Facebook, as YouTube as well, and you will all have a great night. Thanks for watching, and catch us next time.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad. Have a great night.
Thank you for the opportunity. You as well.
Thank you.